My name is Evelyn Ward, and I am 64 years old. For most of my life, I have been the sort of woman people describe as dependable. I paid my bills on time, clipped coupons, baked pies for the neighbors, and kept quiet even when I probably should have spoken up. After my husband Henry passed 8 years ago, I learned to enjoy the silence of my own company. I lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment on Maple Avenue, owned by a small-time landlord named Tom Greeley, who treated the building like an aging pet, affectionate, but not exactly attentive. My day-to-day rhythm was slow and gentle. Morning tea. A walk to the corner store. Afternoon volunteering at the library. Evenings spent reading old travel guides I once hoped to use. It wasn't an exciting life, but it was mine. I had no reason to imagine that the ground beneath me was about to shift. But it did start with whispers, subtle, persistent hints of tension. My daughter, Laura, would call and mention how expensive groceries had become. My son, Michael, would ask if I was being smart with money. They never said it outright, but I felt the concern building, like storm clouds gathering at the far end of a field. I knew where it came from, the fact that I had been dipping into my savings recently. Not for anything reckless. Just repairs and replacements. My refrigerator died, my glasses needed updating, and my doctor suggested I get a new mattress for my back. Ordinary things. Necessary things. But somehow, the fact that I wasn't hoarding every dollar made my children uneasy. Still, I brushed it off. Families worry. That's what they do. At the same time, something unrelated, or so I thought, began happening in my building. Tom, the landlord, was growing increasingly absentee. Repairs went undone. Neighbors whispered about the possibility of new ownership. Then, one afternoon, I overheard Tom arguing with someone on the phone in the hallway. He mentioned renewals, valuation, and pressure from upstairs. When he noticed me standing by my door, he quieted his voice and waved awkwardly. That night, as I sat in my living room, I felt a thin, cold thread of apprehension. Apartments in our area were suddenly skyrocketing in price. If someone bought the building, I doubted the new owners would keep rent as affordable as Tom had. For the first time in years, I felt the shadow of uncertainty creeping into my quiet, contained life. I had no idea how tangled my children's concerns and the building's future would soon become. A week later, Laura and Michael invited themselves over. They arrived early, too early, holding stiff expressions. They sat me down at my own kitchen table, as if I were the child and they were the parents. Laura folded her hands. Michael stared at a spreadsheet on his phone. "Mom," Laura began gently, "we're worried about your spending." I blinked at her. "What spending?" Michael looked up. "It's been increasing." We checked the statements. My chest tightened. They had gone through my bank accounts. Without asking. Without even mentioning the idea. While they detailed every purchase I had made in the last 6 months, accusing me of being careless, irresponsible, maybe even forgetful, something in me, something quiet but fierce, began to stir. And by the end of that conversation, without realizing it, they set in motion a chain of events that would change all our lives. Because while they argued about my spending, they had no idea. I was already negotiating their lease renewal. And negotiating it for reasons they had yet to imagine. What did my children have to do with the building's future, and why was I involved in their lease at all? I didn't raise my voice during their lecture. I listened, calmly, as they dissected my life as if it were a failing business. It didn't seem to occur to them that I had lived longer, managed more crises, and survived more losses than either of them. Instead, they saw a widow nearing retirement age, and in their minds, that translated to fragility. The part that stung wasn't their worry. It was their arrogance. "We're considering getting power of attorney," Michael said casually, as though he were discussing the weather. I stared at him. "Why on earth would you need that?" "So we can help you manage things before it becomes a problem." What problem? They wouldn't say. They danced around the word they were both thinking. Incompetence. The implication that I was losing the ability to make decisions for myself. My hands trembled, not from fear or anger, but from a quiet, electric disbelief. After they left, self-satisfied, certain they had helped, I sat alone for a long time. Then, that evening, the building superintendent, Rita, knocked on my door. "You're Evelyn Ward, right?" she asked, holding a thick envelope. "Tom said you're the tenant he trusts most. Something about your background in clerical work." I nodded slowly. I was an office manager for 30 years. She handed me the envelope. "He needs help drafting lease renewals for the tenants. He's overwhelmed. He said he'd pay you to assist." The irony nearly made me laugh. While my own children questioned my ability to manage my basic life, a landlord trusted me with official paperwork that affected dozens of people. But then came the shock, one that made my stomach drop. Inside the envelope was a master list of upcoming lease renewals. Half of the building was due for rent reassessment. And on that list, I saw 2 tenants I hadn't expected. Laura Ward, Michael Ward. My children. And next to their names, a handwritten note from Tom, "Children of Evelyn. Good tenants but overdue for market adjustment. Need to discuss significant increase unless an exception is justified." My throat tightened. I hadn't even known they were moving into this building. They told me they were downsizing, but never specified where. Suddenly everything made sense. Their obsession with my finances, their insistence that I was losing control. If they became financially strained, managing me would be easier. Convincing me to sign things might also be easier. And the biggest jolt? Both their leases were up in less than 90 days. And Tom wanted steep increases they absolutely could not afford. My children weren't just worried about my spending. They were about to lose their apartments. Their life choices, their secrecy, their need for control. It all began to fit together like the pieces of a puzzle sliding into place. I stared at their names until they blurred. They had come into my home, lectured me, invaded my accounts, all while hiding that they were living 2 floors below me, drowning financially, and hoping to secure influence over my life to stabilize their own. Now the question was simple. Should I protect them? Or finally teach them that control is not love? When I met with Tom the next morning, he gave me information that changed everything, and revealed just how deep my children's deception ran. Tom met me in his cramped, paper-cluttered office on the 1st floor. The building always smelled faintly of old carpet and radiator steam, but that morning, I felt acutely aware of every detail. Maybe because I sensed that the truth waiting for me in that room wasn't going to be gentle. He motioned for me to sit. "I appreciate your help, Evelyn. I know it's a lot." I opened the folder to the page with my children's names. "Before we begin, I didn't know Laura and Michael lived here." Tom rubbed his forehead. "Oh, I assumed you did." He hesitated. "They insisted I not mention it to you." My stomach tightened. "Did they say why?" "They said they didn't want you thinking they were depending on you." Depending on me. The irony was astounding. Tom continued. "They moved in about a year after your husband passed. I thought maybe they wanted to be closer to you." That might have been true, at first. But I had raised my children to be independent. Perhaps too independent. After Henry died, they both threw themselves into careers and relationships that seemed to drift from one failed attempt to another. Laura had a way of choosing partners who treated her like a stepping stone rather than a companion. She was always trying to prove she wasn't a burden. Michael, on the other hand, pushed himself into financial corners through ambition without planning. He believed success was one good break away, even when the numbers suggested otherwise. Instead of coming to me openly when things grew difficult, they built a story around themselves. One where they were the caretakers, and I was the responsibility. It must have been easier than admitting they needed help. Tom pulled out a second sheet. "Before you decide anything about their rent, there's something else you should know." I braced myself. "Both of them," he said carefully, "are behind on utilities. And they've been late twice on rent. Not enough to evict, but enough that I have to report it during renewal." My breath steadied. It wasn't anger I felt, it was an old, familiar ache. The ache of a mother who knows her children are spiraling but don't trust her enough to admit it. Tom continued, if they get the new rates, I don't think they'll be able to stay here. I closed the folder. What do you expect me to do? He shrugged softly. You're their mother. And you're also the only tenant who reads thoroughly and gives honest feedback. I thought you'd want to know before we finalize anything. I nodded slowly. 4 years after Henry's death, I had carried guilt like a stone in my chest. I wondered if I had failed my children emotionally while trying to stay afloat myself. Maybe my grief had distanced me from them more than I realized. Maybe they compensated by pretending they were doing fine. Maybe I compensated by pretending I didn't notice. But now, with their leases on my desk and their futures crossing paths with mine in ways they never expected, I felt something shifting inside me. This wasn't just about rent. This was about respect, transparency, responsibility, and perhaps a long overdue reckoning. If they wanted to manage my life, they needed to learn how to manage their own. I decided to quietly investigate their financial situation, and what I found in their apartment mailboxes stunned me. I didn't spy. I didn't snoop. I simply paid attention. The one skill motherhood never stops sharpening. My investigation began the following week, under the guise of helping Tom with paperwork. The building hallway was always busy, so no one noticed when I paused by the mailbox cluster on the first floor. Not to open anything, of course. That would be crossing a boundary I wasn't prepared to cross. But envelopes left sticking out? Notices taped to doors? Those were already exposed to anyone walking by. And my children's names appeared on a troubling number of those notices. 2 envelopes bore bright red stripes from the electric company. Another from the internet provider. A final one from the city, stamped with the unmistakable phrase, "Final warning." I felt my breath catch. They weren't just struggling. They were sinking. Why hadn't they told me? Pride, perhaps. Shame. Or maybe, they were hoping that once they secured power of attorney, my savings could quietly cover their emergencies. Returning to my apartment, I made tea and sat with the folder of leases again. I approached the situation as the old office manager in me would. Gather evidence, establish facts, avoid assumptions. So I dug further. I asked Rita in a casual tone whether any maintenance requests had come from units 2B and 3C, my children's apartments. She told me they had cancelled several, apparently trying to avoid service fees. I visited the building's online tenant portal, where unpaid balances were publicly displayed for accountability. Their accounts showed late fees that had accumulated for months. Then, the final piece of the puzzle arrived in the form of a conversation I didn't expect. I was walking home from the store when I ran into Brenda, a neighbor who worked at the same insurance office where Laura had once been employed. She sighed heavily. "Your daughter's been having a hard time, Evelyn." I didn't want to say anything, but she lost a job 2 months ago. My heart clenched. She told me she was still working. She didn't want to worry you. And Michael. A quick call to an old family friend who worked with him revealed he had taken a massive pay cut, nearly half his salary, after his department downsized. My children were in crisis. But rather than confide in me, they tried to convince themselves, and me, that I was the problem. As I gathered each detail, a clear picture emerged. They weren't selfish. They were drowning in silence. But their method of coping, by controlling me, was unacceptable. By the end of the week, Tom needed a decision. Renewal notices had to go out. And that was when I took a step neither my children nor Tom expected. I requested a private meeting with Tom about their leases. He raised a brow. "Are you sure?" "Yes," I said. "But first, I want to see the numbers. All of them." He handed me the full breakdown, future rates, market comparisons, late payment histories. And after reviewing them, I said the words that would set everything in motion. "I have a proposal." Tom agreed to my plan, on one condition. And that condition would lead to the moment I finally confronted my children with the truth. Tom leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. Your proposal is reasonable, he said slowly. But unusual. I nodded. Unusual is fine. As long as it's fair. He tapped the edge of the folder. All right. I'll offer your children a reduced renewal rate, far lower than the market increase. He paused. But they need to know it's you who made it possible. Not me. I understood the significance immediately. Tom wasn't interested in being the unseen savior. He wanted transparency, the very thing my children had resisted offering me. It was a condition I respected. I'll tell them, I said. But I knew telling them wouldn't be simple. They would resist the idea that they needed my help. They'd twist it into concern about my finances, claim I couldn't afford to be generous, or insist they didn't want to burden me. So I prepared. I spent 2 days gathering every piece of evidence I had collected, logging each detail with the same meticulous care I once gave my office files. When my children underestimated me, they forgot I had been a professional organizer of chaos for decades. Then, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, I invited them both to my apartment. Laura arrived first, looking tired and carrying a reusable grocery bag filled with inexpensive canned goods. She claimed she was stocking me up, though I noticed she had no groceries of her own. Michael showed up 10 minutes later, already irritated, muttering about a parking ticket. We sat at the same kitchen table where they had lectured me. This time, I controlled the conversation. I know you both live in this building, I began calmly. Their eyes widened. And I know you're behind on rent, utilities, and other expenses. Laura's face drained of color. Mom. I held up a hand. I also know you lost your job, Laura, and Michael, that your salary was reduced. Silence. Thick, heavy, humiliating silence. How do you know all this? Michael asked defensively. Because I listen. Because I pay attention. Because I am not nearly as fragile as you've convinced yourselves I am. Laura swallowed. We didn't want to worry you. That, I said gently, is not the same as lying. I opened the folder between us. These are your upcoming lease renewal rates, I said. As they stand, neither of you can afford to stay. Michael muttered a curse. Laura blinked rapidly, fighting tears. But, I continued, Tom has agreed to reduce both renewals, significantly. You can stay. You won't face eviction. Relief flickered through them like a spark. But then I delivered the final truth. He agreed only because I negotiated on your behalf. They froze. Laura whispered. Why would you do that after everything? Because, I said, love isn't control. And responsibility isn't shame. You tried to manage me because you were afraid. I'm helping you because I choose to. But this help comes with honesty. From now on, we speak openly. No more secrets. Michael leaned back in his chair, voice shaking. Mom, we thought we were protecting you. No, I said softly. You were protecting your pride. The truth hung between us, delicate but undeniable. And for the first time since Henry died, I felt the three of us standing on equal ground. Not parent and children, not rescuers and rescued, but individuals with tangled lives and complicated hearts. But the confrontation wasn't finished. There was one more test of honesty they didn't expect, and it arrived in the form of a letter slipped under my door that evening. The letter was folded neatly and slipped beneath my door sometime after dusk. The handwriting was unmistakable, Tom's bold, slightly crooked block letters. I opened it slowly. Evelyn, it read, found this in the wrong mailbox. Thought you'd want to see it before anyone else. Inside was another envelope, addressed to me but clearly intended to be delivered later. It was from the county clerk's office. A request for preliminary paperwork regarding power of attorney. Requested by Laura Ward, Michael Ward. My pulse slowed to an icy crawl. That meant the process hadn't been a hypothetical threat spoken in frustration. They had already initiated it. I sat at the table, breathing deeply, letting the air settle into my lungs. I wasn't angry. I was disappointed, not because they wanted to help, but because they tried to take over without a single honest conversation. The next morning, I asked them both to come again. They arrived uncertain, nervous, expecting perhaps another round of difficult truths. But what they walked into was final clarity. I placed the letter on the table. Neither spoke at first. Their faces carried a mixture of guilt and embarrassment. Michael broke the silence. "Mom, we were scared," Laura added quietly. "We thought you were slipping. You've been spending more. You've been distant." I nodded. "I've been spending because life requires maintenance. I've been distant because you were hiding half your lives from me." They looked away. "You wanted power of attorney," I said softly, "not to protect me, but to stabilize yourselves." Michael's jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. "And you didn't think I was strong enough to handle the truth." Laura began to cry silently, shoulders shaking. I leaned forward. Children grow up thinking their parents are infallible. Parents grow old realizing their children are human. Both realizations are painful. But neither gives you the right to take away my autonomy. They nodded slowly. Then I offered the confrontation they weren't expecting. Not about their missteps, but about mine. "When your father died," I said, "I withdrew into myself. I stopped asking questions. I let you drift. I thought giving you space was love. But all it did was teach you that struggle is something you must hide." Laura wiped her eyes. "Mom, we should have told you. About everything." "Yes," I said gently. "And I should have been present enough for you to feel safe telling me." The room fell into a quiet, fragile stillness, one born not of conflict, but recognition. Then I slid the letter toward them. "You will withdraw this request?" Michael nodded immediately. "Of course. And if someday I do need help making decisions, we will discuss it openly. Together. With dignity." Laura whispered. "We will." I sat back, breath steady. "This isn't revenge," I said softly. "This is accountability. The same accountability you expected from me." For the first time in years, they truly saw me, not as a fragile widow, but as a woman capable of boundaries, intelligence, and strength. The next week, Tom delivered the final lease contracts, but they came with an unexpected offer that changed not just my children's lives, but mine as well. When Tom knocked on my door with the finalized renewal contracts, he had an odd expression, half amusement, half admiration. "You've stirred the nest," he said, handing me the envelopes. "I didn't stir anything," I replied. "I clarified it." He chuckled. "Either way, things are changing. And not just for your kids." I opened the contracts. Both renewals were reduced exactly as negotiated. Manageable, fair, sustainable. My children wouldn't face eviction or crushing rent hikes. They could rebuild. But attached to my own contract was a separate note. "Evelyn, you've been doing more for this building than I have these past months. If you're willing, I'd like to officially hire you as a part-time administrative assistant. Flexible schedule, modest pay, rent reduction included." I stared at the page, stunned. Tom scratched his chin. "You're organized, respected by the tenants, and honestly, you keep me sane. I'd rather work with someone who cares than hire another temp who's gone in 2 weeks." For 8 years, I drifted without purpose after Henry died. I filled time but not meaning. This was purpose. I accepted. The news rippled through the building. Tenants smiled at me in the hallways. Some thanked me for helping keep rent fair. And my children? Well, they reacted in complex, heartfelt ways. Laura hugged me tightly, whispering, "Mom, I'm proud of you." A week later, she got a job interview, her first in 2 months. She walked in with confidence she hadn't shown in years. Michael spent evenings reorganizing his finances using templates I gave him from my old office days. He apologized more than once for how he treated me, And each time, he meant it a little more fully. Consequences don't always have to be punishing. Sometimes consequences are the natural result of truth, growth, responsibility, humility. And in this case, they were also redemptive. By confronting my children, I didn't break us. I realigned us. But perhaps the most unexpected outcome came from Tom himself. A few days after I started helping him officially, he announced he was planning to retire in 2 years and wanted someone trustworthy to gradually take over more responsibilities. "You've got the head for it," he said. "If you want to learn the ropes, I'll teach you." I laughed. "I'm 64, Tom. Isn't that a little late to start a new job?" He shrugged. "You're sharper than half the people I interview." For the first time in a long while, I felt not just useful, but alive. On a quiet evening stroll, Laura asked me a question that forced me to confront the deeper meaning of everything we had survived. It was late spring when Laura joined me for a walk around the block. The breeze carried the scent of lilacs from someone's garden, and the sidewalks glowed gold in the warm evening light. We walked in silence for a while, comfortable for once, until she finally spoke. "Mom, do you ever regret not telling us how strong you really are?" I smiled faintly. "You knew. You just forgot." She laughed softly. "I think we forgot a lot of things." We stopped near a bench beneath a street lamp. She sat. I remained standing for a moment, watching the light flicker against the pavement. "Do you know why your brother and I panicked?" she asked. "I have guesses," I said gently. She looked up at me with eyes that reminded me of her childhood. "When Dad died, we felt like we lost both parents. You were here physically, but you were somewhere else emotionally. We didn't know what grief looked like in adults. We thought you were fading. And when we saw you spending more lately, we assumed it meant you were slipping again." I sat beside her, placing my hand over hers. "Grief," I said softly, "does not fade when children expect it to. And healing does not follow a schedule." But I never faded. I simply walked through a dark place alone because I thought I was protecting you. She leaned her head against my shoulder. "We should have asked. We should have seen you as a person, not just a mom." "That," I whispered, "is a lesson both parents and children take time to learn." We watched a couple stroll by with a dog. Somewhere, a window opened, and someone began playing a piano. Life, in its quiet persistence, unfolded around us. "Your brother and I withdrew the power of attorney request," she said. "We also signed up for financial counseling through the community center." I nodded proudly. "And Mom," she continued, "we want to earn your trust back, not just apologize for losing it." I squeezed her hand. "You already started." When we stood to head home, I felt the weight of years lifting, not erased, but understood. At my apartment door, she paused. "Mom, what you did with the leases. That was incredible." "It wasn't revenge," I said. "No," she agreed. "It was leadership. And maybe it was." As I watched her walk down the hallway toward the stairs, I realized something important. Revenge doesn't always mean causing pain. Sometimes revenge is simply restoring truth in a situation built on misunderstanding. Sometimes it is guiding people back to themselves. Sometimes it is standing tall enough that others finally see you clearly. My children saw me now. Not as a burden. Not as someone slipping. But as the woman I had always been. Quiet, steady, capable, and deeply human. And as for me, I found a new purpose. A second career. A renewed bond with my children. And the courage to assert my worth with dignity rather than anger. In the end, the lesson was simple. When people underestimate you, the most powerful revenge is becoming undeniable. Thank you for walking through this story with me. If you'd like more stories of truth, justice, and quiet strength, I'd love to tell them.